All right, my fabulous love bunnies, here we go. Chapter 7, Secret of the Shadow, Making Peace with Your Story. To liberate ourselves from the confines of our stories, we must be willing to give up the comfort of our self-made cocoons. I once heard a story of a young girl who asks a wise old woman, "How does one become a butterfly?" With a twinkle in her eye and a big smile, the old woman replies, "You must want to fly so much that you are willing to give up being a caterpillar." Breaking out of the cocoons of our stories can sometimes be a slow and painful process, but the moment we break away, we liberate our souls and bask in the joy of emotional and spiritual freedom. In order to step outside our stories, we must first learn to love, honor, and cherish them for all the ways they have contributed to us. We must acknowledge the experiences they have brought us and the wisdom they have bestowed on us. Then and only then will we be able to make peace with our stories and move beyond them to fulfill our deeper desires. I'm always baffled by the long-standing grudges we hold against ourselves. Why do we continually blame ourselves for events that happened 10, 20, 30 years ago? Why do we feel so unworthy of complete and total salvation or of absolution for the crimes of our past? Debbie has spent years dwelling on this question. She had watched people continually sabotage themselves, robbing themselves of all that is truly important and depriving themselves of all that which would feed their souls. Is it possible that at some level we are continually trying to kill ourselves, or if not our entire selves, at least some dark, awful part, the aspects of incidents we feel the most shame about? The destructiveness of self-blame and self-loathing can be seen throughout our society. Addiction, violence, abuse, and underachievement permeate all our lives. Forgiving yourself. Having spent years in the self-help movement, first working on herself, then acting as a guide for others, Debbie had come to understand that the core of healing is self-forgiveness. There's nothing, and I mean nothing, more essential to the healing process. Until we make peace and forgive ourselves for all aspects of our lives and all our stories, we will continue to use our past to beat ourselves up and to sabotage our deepest dreams. Self-forgiveness happens when we relax into the vulnerability of our humanity and find compassion for our own internal struggles. When we are able to forgive ourselves, we come to understand why we are the way we are, why we believe what we believe, and why we feel the way we feel. Serrano Kelly, the author of The Game, said, "When you understand, things will begin to change." As long as we can continue to feel bad about our stories, until we have done everything in our power to understand why they're there, why we will continually be drawn back into the confines of our dramas. Only when we accept our stories and forgive ourselves completely will we'll be able to extract all the wisdom our stories hold. Only then will we be free to live outside the limitations set by our shadow beliefs and our stories. So resolving our unfinished business. Until we have come to a place of self-forgiveness, we won't be able to manifest our most extraordinary selves and live the life of our dreams. How can we feel worthy of love, success, abundance, and perfect health when our stories continually remind us that we are flawed, insignificant, and unworthy? How can we wake up in the morning calling forth the best from the universe when we beat ourselves up about our selfishness and continue to feel bad about leaving our relationships? How can we openly receive divine grace knowing that in our past we ripped off our brother or sexually assaulted our sister? How can we honor ourselves knowing that we continually ignore the callings of our own inner voice? Our unfinished business is the source of our guilt. Lane and Paul Cartwright, in their book Straight from the Heart, say, "A guilty mind expects punishment." Guilt will cause you to attract people and/or situations to validate your unresolved guilty thoughts and about yourself. Our guilt comes from not listening to ourselves, from making choices that go against our core beliefs, from disappointing those we love, and from choosing behaviors that we feel are selfish. The source of our guilt is that we think we have done something wrong or bad. We fear and expect that we will attract the punishment we feel we really deserve. To the extent that we haven't cleaned up the unfinished business from our past, we will unconsciously punish ourselves by withholding the love, success, and abundance we desire. That's what we do. Making peace with your inner judge. Until we make peace with our internal judge and jury, we will never allow ourselves to feel and receive divine forgiveness. Our inner judge knows the difference between right and wrong. Imagine that lying beneath the surface of our consciousness is a great scale of justice that knows our highest good. Debbie liked to think of this inner knowing as a set of karmic scales. Our internal karmic scales know when we have violated ourselves and when we have violated others. It knows when we are out of balance. Our karmic scales represent our inner knowing, our internal sense of integrity, the part of us that knows what is right and what is wrong. This inner judge holds our internal scales of justice, supporting us in honoring the integrity of the human spirit. All of us had the experience of crossing the lines of our own inner knowing. All of us at one time or another heard the voice of intuition, decided to shut it out or block it off so that we could stay in our stories and attend to our own agendas. But each time we ignore our intuition, each time we fail to listen to our inner voice, every time we follow our heads and not our hearts, we are actually committing a violation against our deepest selves. Those violations are what keep our karmic scales out of balance and keep us locked inside our dramas. Until we learn to honor the sacredness of our inner knowing and our intuition, we will create pain and drama to guide us back in the direction of our highest selves. Imagine that within the package called you came an operating system to hold you to the highest expression of yourself. This operating system is your guide, letting you know when you are on track and when you are off. Its only job is to support you in manifesting your most extraordinary self. It is your own personal guide. It has no agenda other than fulfilling your personal mission and supporting you in bringing forth your gifts to our world. How is it that we get disconnected from this guidance system? How do we separate from the universal stream of intelligence that flows so naturally through us? At some point in our lives, all of us have been told that our feelings are not important. We might have even been cautioned that if we continued listening to our inner urges and callings, we would be ousted from our families, punished, or separated from those we love. These mixed messages confuse us, and gradually we begin doubting ourselves and our own inner knowing. Instead of trusting our inner truth, we consciously and unconsciously discount from our internal operating system. Slowly, we lose trust and lose touch with our own internal sense of what is right and wrong. No longer connected to our inner light that guides us, we decide to follow our parents or other people who look like they are doing okay in their lives. Eventually, we forsake our own voice so that we can feel like that we fit in and belong. These are the violations of self. Many of us get alarmed and inspired into action when we witness violations in the world. When someone is mugged, raped, or abused, we feel an immediate sense of injustice. It is more difficult to catch sight of the violations we perpetuate against ourselves, for we often violate ourselves in seemingly small and unnoticeable ways. We violate ourselves when we don't listen to ourselves or trust our instincts or claim what we want. We violate ourselves when we shut down our dreams, when we don't take the time to care for ourselves, or when we don't make our inner lives a priority. We violate ourselves every time we deprive ourselves of appreciation and acknowledgement for our hard-earned efforts, and every time we deny our special gifts. We violate ourselves when we choose to focus more on our flaws than on our beauty. We violate ourselves when we don't give ourselves the nutrition we hunger for, when we make bad choices, and when we refuse to forgive ourselves for being in our present circumstances. We violate ourselves when we withhold compassion from ourselves for the mistakes we've made, and when we spend more time listening to the negativity of our shadow boxes than to the love of our hearts. We violate ourselves when we look for what's wrong instead of what's right. We violate ourselves when we fail to do what brings us joy. We violate ourselves by keeping ourselves small. Most of the violations we commit against ourselves go completely unnoticed by our conscious awareness. But our psyches are acutely aware of the moment we stray from our own internal guidance systems. Debbie once led a seminar where she asked people to list all the ways they betrayed themselves in each area of their lives. Here are some of the things that were shared. We violate our bodies by overeating, eating food we know that doesn't agree with us, cheating on our diets, telling ourselves we are going to exercise and not following through, not taking enough time for rest and recreation, abusing ourselves with cigarettes, alcohol or drugs, criticizing ourselves when we look in the mirror, paying more attention to our flaws, staying so busy that we cannot hear the signals our bodies tell us, listening to our self-loathing internal dialogues. We violate ourselves in relationships by staying in relationship with physically or emotionally abusive people, doing things for or with friends that we don't want to do, having sex when we don't want to, depriving ourselves of intimacy when we do want it, breaking agreements and commitment with the others, gossiping about others, pretending to like people that we don't, not spending time with our loved ones, withholding our feelings from others, stepping over our personal boundaries or compromising our integrity, making other people's needs more important than our own. We violate our own financial security by spending more than we earn, running up our credit card debt, bouncing checks, lying about our income, not saving money, being unconscious about our spending, stealing, ignoring our debts, paying our bills late. Most of us try to achieve transformation even as we continue to commit offenses against ourselves. We think that we attend only one more seminar, read one more book, or just think happy thoughts. We won't have to clean up all the ways we are violating ourselves. We can read thousands of self-help books, meditate every day, and sit at a guru's feet. But if we use the wisdom we've gained only to put ourselves down and diminish our worth, we have violated ourselves. Each time we look in the mirror and see only part of who we are, every time we spend more time listening to our shadow boxes rather than acknowledging our greatness, we have committed a violation of self. When will we stop? When will we see we have become the perpetrators and we are the only ones who can stop the internal violence? Subtle violations. As she does most mornings, Wendy woke up with a resolution to eat well. She specifically made the internal commitment to stay away from bread and sugar, two foods that she knew didn't agree with her. She stuck to her resolution all through the morning and even at lunch, but in the afternoon, when her coworkers brought in cupcakes from the local bakery to celebrate someone's birthday, Wendy, reasoning that it would be impolite to decline, ate one of the cupcakes. Instantly, she recognized that familiar sinking sensation in her gut that was too painful to be with. Filled with resignation, she tossed her commitment to herself out the window and pretended that what she had done didn't matter. She went home that day feeling heavy, lifeless, and disconnected from herself. That night, while meditating, Wendy realized that cheating on her diet was a way she consistently violated herself. Emily, a stay-at-home mother of two, tucked in her children into bed after a long and stressful day. "We'll have fun together tomorrow, I promise," she whispered as she kissed them both goodnight. And as she walked out of their room, she thought of ways to make the next day special for the three of them. She promised herself she wouldn't watch her soap opera unless her children decided to take naps and committed to giving them her undivided attention. But by 2 o'clock the next day, when Zachary and Alex still hadn't shown any signs of wanting to take naps, Emily found herself growing impatient and resentful. Her commitment to enjoying a peaceful day with her children was quickly forgotten, and Emily found herself watching her soap opera in her bedroom while her children cried at her feet. From that point on, Emily's hopes for the day were gone, and all three of them were grumpy. That evening, disturbed by the outcome of the day, Emily went inside herself and asked, "How can tomorrow be a better day for me and my kids?" At that point, she got in touch with the resentment that had been building inside her for weeks. Emily needed more time for herself. Emily's own inner child was screaming for mommy time. She realized that caring for two children all day long while taking no time for her own needs was itself a violation against herself. And when she was not acting with integrity toward herself, she tended to take her frustrations out on her children. Emily saw that in order to bring balance to herself and her family, she would need to carve out some time of her own. She came up with the creative idea of trading babysitting duties with another stay-at-home mom in her neighborhood. Once she had the time she needed, Emily was able to stay present with her children and follow through on her promises to them. By living inside her own integrity and honoring her deepest truth, Emily was able to make a new choice, one that led her outside the confines of her story. Our violations against ourselves often camouflage themselves in subtle ways. Even now, you might be trying to figure out ways to minimize this conversation. Check in and see, are you denying this truth? Are you justifying or affirming that this is not you? Look deeply over the course of the next several days and identify where you're committing violations against yourself. Are you willing to examine the depth of abuse that you create on a daily basis? Do you continually violate yourself in the name of your story? It's your life. Only you have the ability to change it. This is your chance to dig deep. You can look back and see that you stayed in the cocoon of your story, skimming the surface of your pain, or you can look back and see that you challenged yourself, told the truth, took responsibility, and took action that was consistent with the kind of person you desire to be. Balancing the karmic scales. Making amends for our self-violations is the highest act of honor we can possibly bestow upon ourselves and others. Making amends restores our integrity and is a vital step in making peace with our stories. It is important that we go back through our lives with the intention of making our wrongs right, balancing your karmic scales. This means making amends to everyone in our lives who we have in some way wounded, lied to, cheated, or betrayed. I know that in order to heal and make peace with my life, I would have to clean up all the chaos I have caused in myself, in my relationships, and in the universe. I wanted so desperately to be able to stand in front of the mirror and in front of all the people and feel good, not only about my present, but also about my past. Over the years, I had left many people angry, disappointed, and hurt. I had also committed my shares of crimes against nature, institutions, and other people. I had my first shot at cleaning my past in a 12-step program, where I learned that I needed to make amends to those whom I had hurt. At first, the thought seemed overwhelming. How could I ever do this? The mere idea of walking up to someone and telling them that I had lied or stolen from them made me tremble in shame. It was odd. I thought I had never cared what others thought about me because I seldom experienced any regret. But standing in front of this project called Cleaning Up My Past, I was sick with fear and shame. My list of victims seemed too long to face. But knowing that I could never really feel good about myself until I made my wrongs right, I summoned the courage to come clean with those I had hurt and atone for the crimes of my past. I found it hardest to confront past employers and friends of my family, but person by person, I was able to say I was sorry, pay back money I owed, and take responsibility for who I had been in the past. Little by little, my self-esteem started to rebuild itself, and I began the miraculous process of feeling good inside. This process enabled me to make peace with my story. Each amend that I made loosened the chains that had tied me to the drama of my past. If we don't live a life grounded in integrity, we will try to build our transformation on top of a lie. In order to live the life, our dreams, we need to have a strong foundation on which to build who we are and what we stand for. Anytime we are living outside our personal integrity, we put a well-known wall up between ourselves and others and the life of our dreams. And any area in our lives where we cease to act out of integrity or violate our internal rules, we are cutting ourselves off from the totality of our power and our ability to create what we want. Cheryl Richardson, author of Life Makeovers, says we all have different sets of internal rules which make up our personal integrity. Most people are unaware of how much energy it takes to live outside of our internal rules. When we restore our integrity, we release enormous amounts of energy that can serve our present-day lives. Our unhealed integrity issues are at the root of our self-abuse. To the extent that we feel out of balance in our inner world, we will deprive ourselves of fulfilling our desires in the outer world. Our self-loathing will call forth from the universe people and events that reflect back to us our deepest feelings about ourselves. Remember, your outer world is a reflection of your inner world, and the reverse is also true. When we are in alignment within ourselves, we feel worthy of receiving everything we desire. We call forth people and events that are consistent with the fulfillment of our deepest desires. But because, again, when we are in balance and feel good about ourselves inside our stories, we will continue to feed, to the degree that we do not clean up the integrity issues inside our stories, we will continue to feed the noisy internal dialogue of our shadow boxes. And until we have integrity, we'll never feel deserving or worthy of living our highest life. Karmic resolution. Karmic resolution is the process of restoring our integrity. We achieve it when we make our wrongs right. Karmic resolution opens the way to transcending our stories and gives us access to the self-love we desire. Karmic resolution is the process of healing our relationships with others, ourselves, and the world. We want to be careful not to approach this task by asking, what's the minimum I can do to get off the hook? Or, what will restore my reputation in the eyes of those involved? Instead, we want to look for the action that restores our own integrity with ourselves. We need to ask, what can I do to balance my karmic scales? And we need to be willing to hear the answer that comes from the deep inside. I promise that if you take on the project of restoring your integrity, you will receive more love, more peace, and inner freedom than you can ever imagine. When our karmic scales are balanced, we naturally open up to whole new levels of self-esteem and worthiness. It is only then we will feel deserving enough to manifest our deepest desires and bask in the abundance of the universe. As long as we are plagued with feelings of guilt and regret, we'll be blinded to our own magnificence. Jordan, a 35-year-old real estate developer, grew up on the streets and learned early on how to survive by his wits. Although he became wealthy beyond his wildest dreams, Jordan was still haunted by the violations he committed in his youth and had tried unsuccessfully for 15 years to make peace with his past. He attended seminars and men's groups and tried to attain forgiveness by being overly generous with his friends and family. Jordan knew all the right things to say and all the right mantras to chant to temporarily absolve himself of his guilt, but still, in the quietness of the night, he was left feeling bad about himself. Jordan was a smart, educated, and well-read man, and it baffled him to no end that he couldn't get over his past. The message that overshadowed his accomplishments was, I don't deserve to have it all. Even though he was keenly aware of the theme of his story and his limitations that it held, he struggled to live outside the boundaries of his personal drama. I suggested to Jordan that we look together to see what he had done in the past that he was still feeling bad about. I explained to him that although our mind can forget our misdeeds, our hearts always remember. Even though he wanted to be free of his guilt, Jordan still resisted the idea that his past wrongdoings could somehow be affecting the present moment. He felt like he was now a good person, even though he admitted to being arrogant and neglectful in his past. I explained that until we make our wrongs right, we will continually beat ourselves up and draw forth experiences that mirror back the bad feelings we harbor inside. Our inner knowing demands that we bring back into balance that which we have violated. I told Jordan that unless he could look at each and every person he had wronged in the eyes, somewhere inside himself he would feel that he was not a good person and would therefore never really feel deserving of total love and forgiveness and never be free to walk out of his personal drama. Jordan courageously agreed to explore his past with the intention of cleaning up all that was left unfinished. Debbie asked him to close his eyes and look inside for an incident that was still unhealed. He recalled a time when he was 18 and worked as a waiter in a trendy restaurant in San Francisco. He worked at that restaurant on and off for 5 or 6 years, taking time off when he needed to focus more attention on his education and coming back when he needed the money. The owner of the restaurant, an older man named Ted, was always gracious to Jordan, allowing him to come and go as he pleased. Jordan confessed that he and others who worked at the restaurant had devised a way to steal money by not entering customers' checks into the cash register. At times, Jordan and his co-workers would also help themselves to food and beverages that belonged to the restaurant. Jordan, who was living hand-to-mouth at the time, rationalized his actions, telling himself that because Ted was a wealthy dentist who lived on the top of the hill and owned two other restaurants, he would never miss the money. He also used the justification that everyone else who worked there was doing the same thing. But now, looking at this incident, Jordan could see that he did really feel awful about treating somebody who had been so gracious and open with him so poorly. When I asked Jordan what he needed to do to make amends with himself for what he had done, he said that the owner of the restaurant was probably dead by now and he didn't know what to do to make it right. But when Jordan called an ex-manager of the restaurant, he found that Ted was alive and still living in the Bay Area. Jordan summoned up his courage and picked up the phone and called Ted, now in his early 80s. Ted was excited to hear from Jordan. He'd always had a fondness for Jordan and had a special place for him in his heart. And after a few minutes of small talk, Jordan told Ted that during the years he had worked at the restaurant, he had stolen roughly $3,000 from him and that he was calling to make amends. In what was one of the most deeply moving moments of his life, with tears in his eyes and an open heart, Ted told Ted that he wanted to send him a check that day to repay him. Ted broke down in tears after hearing Jordan's confession. Jordan was surprised to discover that Ted's restaurants had gone bankrupt and that he had lost all his money and his big house. Ted went on to tell Jordan how hard he had been struggling and how he had just tried to get a loan to pay his bills but had been turned down because of his bankruptcy. He told Jordan that while the $3,000 didn't mean that much to him 15 years ago, it was just the sum he needed now to save his condo from being repossessed. As Jordan wrote the check, he felt it was the best money he had ever spent. He felt clean inside and tremendously grateful that he could now give back to somebody he had taken from. He no longer had to cover up the crimes of his past. For the first time, he felt like he could look in the mirror and feel good about what he saw. He knew that his internal scales were in balance and he had a new sense of self-worth and self-respect. Corey, a participant in one of the coaching programs, had struggled financially for as long as she could remember, and she shared with the group that she had no idea why she was unable to make or keep money in her life. The central theme of Corey's story was that she had to be careful, that otherwise people would take advantage of her. Knowing there must be some karmic imbalance keeping her from attaining her goals, Debbie asked her to make a list of all the places in her life where she was out of integrity financially, and to search her consciousness for any incidents from her past that might be preventing her from receiving the abundance she desires. The first thing on Corey's out of integrity list was an incident that had occurred when she was 12 years old. Corey and her girlfriend had gone to a department store and stolen a lot of the kind of merchandise that appeals to young girls: bathing suits, purses, makeup, and accessories. Then they went back to the girlfriend's house, put all the merchandise on the bed, and started adding up their loot. Although at the time she felt excited because she got away with it, some 14 years later this incident showed up as a huge source of shame. Committed to restoring her integrity and learning to love herself at the deepest level, Corey knew that she would have to make amends for the mistakes of her past. The first task on her list was to call the Macy's store where she had shoplifted and admit what she had done. After speaking to several different people, she was finally transferred to the general manager. When the manager got on the phone, the first thing he said to Corey was, "Are you in a 12-step program?" Corey said, "No, actually I'm in a coaching program, and my assignment this week is to clean up my past and restore any issues that are out of integrity within me." Corey proceeded to tell her story to the manager, and at the end she asked him, "What can I do to make amends for my actions?" He was silent for a moment and then said, "Young lady, I'm very impressed with you. In 24 years in this business, no one has ever called me with an admission like this. I think the best thing you can do is to donate money to your favorite charity. Thank you so much for calling." And then he added, by the way, you really made my day." Corey hung up the phone feeling light, elated, and empowered. She felt free of the chains of her past, as though an internal weight had been lifted from her. She no longer had to suppress this incident. Her internal scales were now coming into balance, and she had transformed this bit of darkness into a bright light. Feeling empowered and stimulated by her newfound freedom, Corey picked up the phone to tackle the second integrity item on her list. When Corey was 18 years old, on a mission to raise money for a trip to Europe, she had made a fraudulent claim against an airline, saying that her bags had been stolen, when in fact they hadn't. Corey had filled out the necessary forms and weeks later received a check for $2,500 in the mail. Corey now felt concerned about how she was going to heal this integrity issue because she didn't have the money to repay the debt. But she courageously called the airline anyway. After several calls, she made her way to a top executive who greeted her with warmth and caring. Corey told her what she had done and asked the woman what she could do to make amends. In her pleasant and soothing Southern accent, the agent replied, "Well, you can certainly write a letter to Human Relations and tell them what you did." Then she added, "Honey, in God's eyes, you're already forgiven." Corey wrote the letter, but afterwards she felt she had more work to do in order to bring balance to her internal scales. So Corey then decided to gather her old clothes and luggage from all her friends and donated them to a local women's shelter. In telling her the story, Corey realized that it hadn't been enough to say she was sorry. She had to give back more than she took. She realized that hiding her offenses only made her feel bad about herself, and that she punished herself through constant self-hatred and a critical inner dialogue. Corey also saw the correlation between her unhealed integrity issues and the fact that she had difficulty making or keeping money. To top it off, Corey now had new insight into why her only trip to Europe was such a disaster. Cleaning up these incidents from her past allowed Corey to see that she didn't have to watch out for other people, that who she needed to watch out for was herself. Corey realized that if she lived a life true to herself and honored her highest integrity, she would feel deserving enough to make and keep the money she earned. Once we balance our internal scales and restore our integrity, we will no longer be pulled back into the old feelings and thoughts that have been tied to these events. As inner lightness occurs, balancing our karmic scales brings us back into alignment with our highest selves. Making amends is a gift that we give ourselves. When we have cleaned up our past and feel good about balancing our internal scales, we can then begin the amazing process of self-forgiveness, making amends to yourself. The process of forgiveness calls on us to create new behaviors to heal our relationship with ourselves. We must look inside because for each of us, these behaviors will be different. Now is the time to make a commitment to honor ourselves where we have once violated ourselves. Here are some suggestions for transforming our relationship with others. Tell the truth to ourselves and others. Take time for the people we love. Schedule time every day to go for a walk, connect, and share what is truly important to us. Meditate every day. Volunteer our time to causes and organizations that help us or inspire us, children with learning disabilities, reading programs in schools. Stop gossiping. Take care of your physical bodies with nourishing food, adequate rest, exercise, fresh air, recreation. Taking care of our minds and our emotional bodies with time spent alone, reading, journaling, praying, honoring our boundaries and listening to our inner sense of what feels good and what doesn't. Making a daily connection with the divine. Process our painful emotions when they come up so they can be healed. Keep our checkbooks in balance and clear up our past debts. Take time acknowledging ourselves for all we are and for the joy we bring to others and for the contributions we've made to our world. Eat foods that nourish our bodies and stop eating when our stomachs are full. Feel gratitude every day for what we have. Making amends releases us from our past and from our stories. It guarantees us a life outside the limitations of our stories. It blesses us with the greatest gifts of all, self-respect and self-love. When we step through the door of self-forgiveness and begin to treat ourselves and others with love and compassion, a new reality emerges. Choosing forgiveness means making a promise to ourselves that we won't use our past to beat ourselves up and that we will practice extreme care with ourselves. When we can love ourselves, when we are crazy When we can love ourselves when we are crazy, hateful, jealous, or sad, we are truly free. All we need to begin is the willingness to forgive ourselves completely. Nobody can make us forgive. Only we can do it. And the time is now. So this is our work, the power of making peace with our past, balancing our karmic scales, and invoking self-forgiveness. Thank you again, for being committed to being on this course with me, for writing our stories together, discovering the secret of our unique recipe.